Hello, thank you for joining us on the latest episode of You Are My Boro, where that isn't Scott Wilson. I've joined by, this is like a weird turning back of time for me. It's Anthony Vickers who's with us instead. Before I explain why Vic's with us, thanks for those who've watched the episode earlier this week and for those who dipped into the comments. We'll get on to the comments and the issues that have been discussed in our next episode, our next regular episode with Scott, which will be first thing next week. Just a reminder, as we always do, to subscribe if you watch on YouTube, or to follow if you listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. So yeah, we promised some special guests, and here's a very, very special guest, Anthony.
C-list celebrity.
Long-time reporter of Middlesbrough and now club author. And you've been busy, Vic.
Yeah, busy. My new book's out. It's The Games That Shaped the Borough. It's it's a history of the club using milestone matches as a way of picking out different themes. You know the way I write it, there's a lot of social and cultural history dragged into it. And it's extremely well researched. I've spent a lot of time in the archives, the Gazette, the Echo, the club minutes, and I've put together what I think is a really interesting approach to the usual suspects of matches that most people will know about, but looking at it in more depth and in a different way. And I hope that all Borough fans, even if they know the story, will find out, things they didn't already know.
I was going to say from the conversations we've had that this is a lot more than just kind of regurgitating match reports from the game or telling the story of the game. It's everything that surrounds the game and the narrative of what it meant.
Yeah, the games themselves are kind of like a hook to hang various strands on. So each game, I do mention the matches, obviously, but it's more the subplots leading up to it and the impact that game might have had on in the years to come. So the matches themselves are a starting point for a kind of a jazz exposition of all the various themes around it.
Before we get into the games, what's the process for you when it comes to writing a book? Is this your third since you?
It's fourth kind of set piece one, but obviously I do other stuff around the club as well.
Talk us through the process from start to finish.
The best thing about it is there's lots of reading. So I wanted to do a history of the club, but kind of cherry pick the highlights and dispose of. What I didn't want to do was this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then they went to Man United and lost 1-0. Those kind of things can be quite soul destroying after a while. I wanted to pick out the various themes and use matches that we know from our mythology, the Manian match or the Battle of Stamford Bridge, for instance, and then pick out all the various bits behind the scenes leading up to it. So to give it a more life, to give it some flesh, rather than it just being a greatest hits of memory matches.
What stood out? Were there anything that you were kind of with any of the games that you were completely taken aback by, that you found out for the first time, something that kind of knocked you off your feet, and in be it kind of an issue within the game itself or something that surrounded the game?
Yeah, I mean, every one I've approached in a different way. It's not formulaic because different games, different eras have different dynamics. So, for instance, I wanted to do matches that highlighted some of the great heroes of the club. So there's a match in there for Camsell, there's a Manian match, there's a Clough match. The Camsell one I found really interesting because obviously we know the story. He's a cut price signing, scores 350 goals for the club, an absolute goal machine, neglected by England. We know all that. When I started, I picked a match where he scored 5 goals away at Man City. It was a top of the table clash, the two teams going for promotion in the second division, and he absolutely ripped Man City apart. Everyone hailed Borough as champions elect, and he was clapped off the pitch by the Man City players. So that seemed like a good place to start with the whole story about Camsell. going into the cut-ins files, not just the local papers, the national papers as well were taking a great interest in this. Boro were briefly the cutting edge of unfolding tactics. Boro were a revolutionary team that season. The offside law had just changed. The FA were very concerned about the declining number of goals, loads and loads of nil-nil draws. The law as it stood was like a throwback to the Victorian game, and it was 3 at the back. You had to have 3 players between you and the goal. And defences had become so well adept at doing what then, an offside trap, where as soon as the opposition got the ball, one of the fullbacks would just peg it forward and play what was then a 5-man attack would all be played offside. So the FA tweaked it and made it 2 at the back, 2 behind the ball. And Boro were the first team to adapt to this. They devised a tactical system that suited the skill set of this young striker that barely broken into the team, who was really fast over the first couple of yards, was adept at kind of disappearing along the shoulder of the last defender, and he would and he had a powerful shot. And the Boro team would slot the ball behind the last defender, and he would just peel off, peg to the edge of the box, and whack it. And obviously, big old divers' boots. Defence found it very hard to turn. Heavy pitches. It gave the advantage to the striker. Boro were the first people to adapt to that. And obviously, we know that he got 59 in the league, another 4 in the FA Cup. And the team scored over 100 goals on their way to promotion. Other teams very quickly adapted. I mean, defences were in total confusion for a couple of seasons. Other teams followed the suit. So obviously we know that Dixie Dean scored 60 the following season. So obviously Everton had adapted. But almost every big club's record scorer was in that following season or the year after. So you had like Hughie Gallagher at Newcastle and Charlie Buchan at Arsenal scoring well over 50 goals because of this tactical development. So I never knew that. I just thought it was a freak that Camsell was an absolute monster and had a golden season. But if you look at the stats in the game over the next 2 or 3 years, they're all over the place. I mean, the year before, I think it was Arsenal had won the title and they'd scored like 75 goals. And then 2 years later, they win the title again, scoring 129. That's a massive difference. So English football was kind of in this massive flux, and Boro were fell lucky, if you like, in that they had a man with the perfect skill set to adapt to the new rules. So I didn't know that, for instance, when I started. So a lot of those kind of stories that come out of it have been fascinating. And I think that'll be the good thing, is that most diehard Boro fans will feel they know these stories, but actually there's so many subplots. And I've gone into a lot of detail. So there's a lot of stuff from the club about the finances, for instance. To come back to the Camsell thing, Boro were absolutely broke. They would not have gone and bought George Camsell under normal circumstances. They'll have been spending £15,000 for a player from Arsenal or Aston Villa. But the post-war depression hit Middlesbrough really, really hard. Obviously, during the war, there'd been a steel boom and shipyarding boom, and places like Middlesbrough were full employment. But after the war, those industries just fell apart. During the mid-20s, when they were poised to sign Camsell, unemployment was in the 30 and 40% in Teesside. The clubs really felt the brunt of that, because obviously it's a discretionary spend going to the match. So a lot of people just didn't. Gates collapsed, and a lot of the people, the directors, were involved in businesses dependent on steel and the various offshoots of that. So the club had no money. They were forced into making sort of bargain buys, and they managed to get Camsell for 500 quid, plus writing off £100 that Durham owed them from a loan. And sometimes these things all just fall into place. So they were forced into buying a cheap striker that they probably wouldn't have looked at. The tactics change, and a new manager comes in and exploits that, and suddenly Boro are back up in the top flight, and with a devastating, potent strike force, and you're back in the game.
I don't want to obviously go through every game and give away the identity of the games that are in there. But there's an Oxford game in there, and it's not the one that fans of more recent seasons will immediately recall.
Yeah, obviously, fans of a certain age, that is a touchstone match. That's a match that has a big cultural shadow. The game in 1967, last day, 4-1 win, seals promotion. That day, Ayresome Park was literally bursting at the seams. A wall went down. Gates came off their hinges. Officially, the crowd was 45,000, but the contemporary reports suggest there was a lot more in there that day. It's a really interesting story around it, because not so much the match itself, but how the season unfolded, because the previous season had been a relegation season. It was the first time Boro had ever been dropped into the third tier to play alongside the likes of mighty Darlington. It came at the end of a long tale of despondency around the Boro. You had the Wilf Mannion era, when you had the best player in the world, 1-0. Brian Clough era, with Alan Peacock scoring loads and loads and loads of goals, 1-0. And relegation for a lot of people was the last straw. And a lot of cynical old guys in flat caps went mumbling away, never to come back. The crowds collapsed. But it left a vacuum. And into that came a whole new breed of fans. And obviously, we all know the terminology of the Ayresome Angels. The evolution of that season and the evolution of that new breed of fans is absolutely fascinating. The summer before, the World Cup had been at Ayresome Park, and crowds were fairly low, ticket prices were relatively low, and a load of young supporters went to Ayresome, possibly their first match, and got whipped up in the whole hysteria around Korea, and like-minded individuals, they decided to carry it on the next season once Boro kicked off again, and they took the whole gate. Basically, it had been vacated by all the cynical old buggers, and the young kids came in, and hundreds at first, then thousands, and they started singing songs. They started. There was a fad for white lab coats, which they would daub in paint with the name of their favourite player on. They would adapt songs from the charts and start singing hymns to the players. And I suppose it's a bit like the Red Faction. It from other parts of the ground, that looks like great fun, and loads of kids want to get involved. So this new group, the Ayresome Angels, it evolves over the course of the season, and it's really interesting following the match reports, because the start of the season is very, very despondent. The relegated side, they start slowly. Come Christmas, they're still in relegation danger, possibly could go down to the fourth division. And gradually over the course of the season, there's more and more references to these loud, colourful fans. And these young lads who are all 15, 16, 17, it's the birth of the teenager. It's the birth of the swinging 60s. These lads have got a little bit of money in their pocket, and they start hiring coaches and go to away games. We're talking about teenagers organising themselves. They set up a formal structure. They buy a clubhouse on Woodlands Road, just near the old Gazette office, and they have membership cards. It's become a very formalised, structured thing. And gradually, in the match reports, they become a more and more prominent. And by December, Cliff Mitchell, obviously totally stumped by what was going on here, they're making their way into the intro, and they're turning up like 2 hours before matches and greeting the players off the team bus to away games, hundreds of them. And the evolution that season, not just of that new type of fandom, the club kind of regenerates as well with all this youthful enthusiasm. So, for instance, that was the first season Bernard Gent appeared with his radio Ayresome, taking requests from the crowd and reading out dedications. And then halfway through the season, the Ayresome Angels are formally named. The club take them on board. They get a column in the programme. They're on the pitch beforehand, handing out prizes and wedding gifts to the players. And that season escalated dramatically. And at the same time, the Ayresome Angels has exploded in terms of numbers and colour and creativity. And the season finishes with that dramatic last dash over the line and towards promotion. Everyone's on the pitch. It's a jubilant time, and that kind of that gave Boro an energy going into the next 2 or 3 years, where Stan Anderson built a fantastic team that was to be the Jack Charlton promotion team. But it's kind of like a rebirth for the club, and we get that sporadically throughout the history of the club, where you get a season of regeneration, where the crowd especially become more and more engaged, animated, and we've seen it ourselves over the years, you know. So the Ayresome Angels regenerates the club once, maybe a similar thing with Brian Robson and the Riverside Revolution, which is covered in this. Possibly you might say that the Karanka era, that forged a new, very tense. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everything was roses, but there was a new strong unity between the fans and the club and the team. So that was a really interesting season, and it also coincided with lots of changes around Teesside. Teesside was a vibrant place then. ICI was booming, steel was booming. The Teesside had just been forged out of all the different county boroughs, and there was a pride about it. And the way it's reported that season's really interesting. I mean, as a newspaper man, you would read that and you would notice all the little changes. For instance, the nickname changed in print. Before that, it had been Borough, Boroughh, and halfway through the season, Gazette's get into the swinging 60s, and it becomes Borough as we know it. And Teesside, which had been hyphenated, becomes one word. There's lots of little changes, and you feel like the club is entering the modern era. It's becoming colour almost.
20 years on from that game, the Battle of Stamford Bridge. I'll just ask you about that one, because I know that's a game and an issue in a time that you studied at length, even before this book.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That was an important game because the whole of another revival, the Bruce Rioch revival, going from liquidation back into the first division in 2 years, really, that's an incredible achievement. And sometimes we almost brush it off because you go on to people talk about that season in the first division, and before you know it, it's relegation again and Wembley, etc., etc. But those 2 years were really exciting. Bruce Rioch built a fantastically entertaining team, and again one that engaged with the fans. And I think that was a really important team because yes, it drew in a whole generation of new fans, but these were young lads that had been to the same school and went to the same nightclubs as the crowd. They had so many cultural touchstones in common. And when you think about in football, we often think that the team is our representatives, or there's something that we can identify with. That team really was. 8 of that team were just like your mates next door. Mm-hmm. And almost everyone in the crowd knew someone who knew someone in that team. So they were like our champions in a lot of ways at a time when Teesside wasn't having a great time in terms of economic recession, unemployment, the Thatcherite cuts in public sector and stuff, and we were having a hard time on Teesside, and it was important that that team, our public face to the world, was doing well. And the Battle of Stamford Bridge, that was when the fairy tale was completed, and Borough were back in the First Division in the face of adversity. And I think people who were fans at that time will tell you that probably that moment of unity under attack was a really transcendental kind of experience. You don't get any more together than that. Than, you know, the team are under attack, you're under attack, even the people in the director's box are under critical attack. So for me, that's an important match in being the fulfillment of the Bruce Rioch revival.
And it's not only games that happen. It's probably the best way into that Blackburn game and all that followed.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ultimate in counterfactuals, isn't it? What would have happened if?
Yeah.
That season was crazy. There's no question about it. You know, it was totally surreal. Ended in treble heartache, and yet so many Borough fans will tell you that's their favourite season. And again, it's the levels of engagement, really, the emotional investment that we had to make in that season. And for me, although yes, first ever FA Cup final, scoring at Wembley, all fantastic memories that you never take anything away from that. But for me, that season revolved around the Blackburn match. There's a really simplistic way of looking at it and saying, if we'd have gone, we wouldn't have had the 3 points deducted. Add 3 points to the final total, we'd have stayed up. I don't think it's anything like that simple. Borough went to Blackburn, or should have gone to Blackburn, on the back of a run of 13 without a win. They'd been absolutely ripped apart at Liverpool. They were in disarray. Ravanelli didn't want to be there. Emerson hadn't been there and had only just been dragged back. There were a lot of injuries, tactical problems. Borough were in a really, really precarious place. I think if they'd have gone to Blackburn, played the YTS lads and the tea lady and lost 6-0, I think the season would have disintegrated. I think Borough would have finished that season 10 points adrift. I think Ravanelli would have legged it. I think Emerson would have gone AWOL again. It would have descended into bickering, recriminations. The fans would have been on Robbo's back, etc., etc. We know the scenario. We've seen it thousands of times before. But the reaction to the 3 points was an incredible emotional engine which drove that season. It would have been so easy to turn inwards and bicker amongst ourselves. And in fact, we circled the wagons and directed all the anger outwards. And that became a real emotional fuel that drove Borough on. And I think it saved the season. I think it revived that season. It drove Borough on through the cup runs, which incidentally were some of the easiest draws that ever happened in football. I mean, to get Chesterfield in the FA Cup final, the semi-final, Stockport in the League Cup semi-final. I mean, that's a pretty wild set of scenarios. And also the anger over the 3 points held the club together through the summer after relegation, because it could have easily disintegrated. And in fact, Borough fans were completely tazzed up and couldn't wait for the next season to start, because they were indignant, righteous anger, and they wanted to put the record straight.
I know we've talked on countless occasions over the years that Brian Robson would regularly tell you about the players who might be coming to Middlesbrough or who there's potentially discussed. What might have happened? Who might have joined had Borough stayed up that season?
Well, I think he'd mentioned Roberto Carlos. He'd had a gentleman's agreement with Paul Ince. There's so many names. Del Vecchio and Batistuta, Boxic. I mean, they had a massive shopping list, and they had the money to bring people in. but obviously it depended on being in the Premier League. So that set that particular phase of the Riverside Revolution back years, and it actually probably scuppered the original intention, which would have been to throw money at it and pump prime in with pure cash. And if they'd have stayed up, we might have seen another summer where they went out and bought someone who just scored in the Champions League, another Brazilian Player of the Year. I mean, the possibilities were endless. Relegation was a slap across the face, and it was a major reassessment. And we changed tack quite a bit over in the years to follow.
There are some very recent in the book as well. But just one final one I want to discuss is the UEFA Cup final. Another conversation we've had on countless occasions over the years is those two semi-finals and whether Boro might have been better off winning.
Absolutely, definitely.
Winning the FA Cup semi-final.
They won the wrong semi-final, and there's an argument. A lot of people have looked through this and said, well, why haven't you picked Stoya? Stoya was a great game, and it was a great game, no question about that. You have to hang it on the final because that is the absolute high point of history for the club. But the weeks leading up to that were just incredible. And I mean, we've discussed this before. They won the wrong semi-final. West Ham, and people almost forget we had a FA Cup semi-final because of the focus on the two matches against Stoya. The West Ham match was sandwiched in there. A lot of people didn't even go to the West Ham match because some of them had only just got back from Bucharest, and the plans were already there for the Stoya rematch. But Liverpool would have been the opponents at Wembley, and they were already in the Champions League. So going to Wembley, win or lose, was entry into Europe for a third successive season. Plus, obviously, it's another FA Cup final, another chance to win. Luckily, Liverpool don't play in blue, so that gives you a big advantage anyway. And losing to Stoya in the UEFA Cup semi-final would have been no disgrace. In fact, it would have been progress because the previous season it had been the round of 16, so it would have been still would have been seen as a fantastic achievement. And had they beat West Ham, then you talk in terms of counterfactuals. There's no saying what might have happened. Third successive season in Europe, recruiting a new manager on that basis, recruiting players on that basis. So all bets would have been off.
I once met Marlon Hare while I was on a stag do, and I told him I've never quite forgiven him. I've never quite forgiven him for that goal. Apologies, on my audio there seems to be some form of background noise this time. So thankfully, I haven't been doing most of the talking for this half an hour. Vic, the book's out now. Christmas is just around the corner.
Perfect. Good time, isn't it?
Perfect gift.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's something that all Boro fans will learn something from. And your favourite seasons, it adds flesh to a lot of our mythical skeleton. So I think, personally, I mean, I've really enjoyed doing it. There's loads of anecdotes in there, loads of excellent quotes, some good little stories. It covers all the big moments in our history, all of the big names that are part of our mythology, and I think it's a cracking good read. 15 quid from the club shop, absolute bargain. Also available online and in the club's pop-up shop in the Hill Street Centre. And at some points I'll be there to scribble in them and deface them for you.
I was going to say, with previous people in the club shop on match days, signing, I would imagine that would be the case between now and Christmas.
Yeah, every home game between now and Christmas. And I will be in the pop-up shop in the town at various points. But so obviously keep an eye on the club socials for that.
Bernie will be there as well, no doubt.
Yeah. It's all right. I'll run him.
Brilliant. Well, thanks so much, Vic, and I would heartily recommend that. That goes without saying. As Vic said, it's 15 quid. It's available now from the club shop. It's online from Friday, which will be now because this video and podcast is going live on Friday. So please, if you're stuck with what to get for a big Boro fan, then there you go. We've sorted you.
I've sorted your Christmas present problem.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Vic. Best of luck
Cheers,
with it, and same time next year when your fifth book is out. Thanks again to Vic, and
Cheers,
we'll be
Boro.
We'll be back early next week with our next episode of You Are My Boro.